Good morning, all colleagues. Welcome to our workshop presented by the South African Cultural Observatory on the Mzansi Golden Economy. And thank you everyone for joining. I will just introduce two of our colleagues today. The first one is Dr. Nguni, who represents the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. He will be presenting and welcome everyone into this workshop and also explain the purpose of this meeting. Then our presenter, Professor Miller Bob, who was the author of this report. Prof. Miller Bob has a vast knowledge of experience, and we welcome that she's able to be with us today. So Dr. Nguni, if I could please hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Good morning, colleagues. Thanks for attending this meeting. As Renee has mentioned, my name is Mphikeleli Mnguni. I'm from the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, but I am also the project manager of the South African Cultural Observatory. Once more, let me say thank you for attending this meeting. I see that there are also colleagues from the department, also outside the department, that is from the entities. Now, let me just start so that we can just focus on the most essential part of this gathering. Here we are going to discuss, listen at the presentation, but also to make our input and comment where it's possible in order to ensure that the presentation that is done here is a comprehensive one. So let me start by saying that Prof is presenting the report that has been commissioned by the department in 2022. What actually informed this report is that if you remember very well, in 2011, when we had the Mzansi Golden Economy, the intention there was to ensure that the arts, culture, and heritage are enhanced so that they contribute also to job creations as well as the economic growth of the country. And over the period, the MGE strategy has been able to do that, but then there were evaluations that were done in the process. And some of the results that have come out, for instance, in 2016, 2017, there was a report that indicated that from this program, there is a high reliance on public sector funding. For instance, that from the practitioners, there was a tendency of depending too much on the public funding. And then also, we also take into cognizance that we had developed the white paper, that is the revised white paper that was published in 2020. And that report also talks about funding, whereby it indicates that we needed to streamline and reposition the funding within the sector so that it is in line, or it is aligned with the department's priorities. Based on that, then the department commissioned this report. But then the initial focus of that report was on MGE. But then we also noted that we also needed to factor in what was embedded in the revised white paper. And then the report has been conducted, and then Prof. Bob has been presenting this report to the department and sometimes to some other entities outside the department. So we have been presenting this report since then. And then, but then there are recommendations in this report that require that we need to relook at our funding model and see if you can mainstream it and to align it with the sector's needs and wants, so that we are in a position to grow the sector but also to support the sustainable development within the sector. So the report also recommended that for us to do that, we need to have the funding in Indaba, so that we address those recommendations that are entailed in the report. Now, we have from that recommendations that we should have Indaba. So the department is planning to have the Indaba on the 8th to the 10th of October, probably May at Birchwood, if the things go as we are planning. So in that Indaba conference, we'll be expecting people who will be participating, making contributions on the issue that is related to the funding. And out of that conference, we must be in the position to come out with the document that will enable us, that is, what is it that we need to do to ensure that our funding is in line with the department's priorities. So what we have done now, we have asked Prof again that to present this report. And then this presentation is nothing else, but it's a contribution that will help to build up to the conference that we are going to have on the 8th and the 10th in of October, as I've indicated. So as Prof presents, I would request colleagues, yes, definitely to listen, but also to make inputs and comments, so that this report, when it goes to the to the funding Indaba, because it's going to be used as a basis for discussion at the funding Indaba, so that when it goes there, then is in a position to inform the delegates that will be at the funding Indaba. It must also assist the delegates at the funding Indaba to come up with a workable funding solution for the sector. So that is the reason that we asked Prof to present today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mguni. Prof. Bob, if it's possible, if I could hand over to you, but just give me a second. Dr. Mguni seems to have a hand. Doctor, would you like to say something else?
No, sorry. I thought I was muting myself.
Okay, no problem. Everybody, please welcome Prof. Miller Bob. I will hand over to her just to give a bit of background on herself before she starts. Thank you, Prof.
Good morning, colleagues. I just want to firstly say hi to everyone. I don't think I've met everyone, so I just wanted to show my face. Online platforms can bring us together, but it's very alienating because I could meet you and I don't know who you are. So let me take this opportunity to greet everyone from a cold and windy Durban, and particularly to thank SACO, the DSAC, and Dr. Mguni and colleagues for the opportunities that they have given us in the research space. For connectivity purposes, I will put my camera off as I go into the presentation. I would prefer that I go through the presentation, colleagues, and then we will take questions and engage in a discussion. I'm particularly pleased with Dr. Mguni's input and underscoring that this is not the end of a project. It is actually a project that informs a very important rethinking of how government and other entities can come together to better fund the CCIs, and including the sports sector, which currently is extremely reliant on government funding. And our research actually shows that that is unlikely to change in the near future, and it's not outside the scope of trends internationally, including those in developing countries as well. Renee and colleagues from SACO, I'll be focusing on the presentation, but if there are very urgent hands or comments that you need me to address, please do just ask me to pause as we continue. So, colleagues, yes, so as Dr. Mnguni has indicated, the MGE strategy is the overarching and remains relevant. It was implemented from 2011, and it has many intentions or objectives, and particularly to support arts, culture, and heritage initiatives in South Africa, and to create over time 5 million jobs in the country within 10 years, from 2011 to 2021. Now, this, of course, as you can imagine, is a very important indicator for us to track, and we do so in other studies as well. Needless to say that the COVID-19 pandemic was a curveball, and really, in terms of all strategies and plans, etc., it is critically important to factor in the COVID-19 impacts, particularly in sectors such as arts and culture, which is linked to other vulnerable sectors in terms of the pandemic, such as tourism, etc. The sustainability of the MGE strategy is of concern, and particularly in terms of using or leveraging the limited funding available. We are a developmental country, and there's a lot of demands on the fiscus. Although a sizable funding budget, it is still limited, and we need to really rethink sustainability imperatives within the sector. I was part of the team, thankfully, with Prof. Kamala Swart, that also did the 2016-2017 MGE strategy review. So in many ways, there was benchmarks, and there were already established recommendations, which provided the background for this particular review and evaluation, and particularly looking at key aspects such as social cohesion, job creation, audience exposure and training, and of course issues around both demand and supply side factors. I'll come to the review we've already conducted in the methodology section as well, because it did inform our methodological choices that we made. In terms of the purpose of this particular study, a key overarching research questions was whether the goals and objectives articulated in the MGE program, and particularly the specific work streams, were met. Just a disclaimer, we did cover almost all of the work streams, but of course did not evaluate SACO itself, which is a part of the MGE program. It would have been highly unethical for us to have included that component as well. So primarily, we looked at a range of objectives, looking at the extent, so what is the scope and nature in terms of the types of impacts of the various, the MGE program as a whole, and the various work streams, particularly in terms of funding allocated where applicable, and number of jobs created. We take cognizance of the fact also that in many ways the support is in kind, this being a typical example where we have workshops, training sessions, etc. And of course, the DSAC does significantly more than just allocate funding. The number of beneficiaries, and of course, in South Africa, where transformation and equity concerns are legislatively required, and speaks to to the type of country we would like to be, we also look at those aspects, particularly in terms of demographic spread, as well as the sectors that are covered in terms of CCI's domain, and we use the UNESCO framework in that regard. So who benefits is a key question, not only that so we don't generalize that the sector benefits. We also provided a very detailed policy context and procedures review, including looking critically at the revised white paper. Colleagues, just before continuing, for those of you who may be interested, please note that the full report as well as this presentation can be shared. So don't worry about snipping and cutting and pasting, etc. We are happy to share the documents with you. The successes and challenges experienced, particularly to inform the recommendations. And as Dr. Nguni has indicated, these objectives were the core of the MGE review, and subsequently the issues around the funding framework was included, including assessing the current funding models and strategies, whether they are adequate, to assess implementation relationships, because you have a range of entities as well as private sector players that are involved in supporting arts and culture, and we looked at it in its entirety, and particularly then drawing on international best practices to see that whether South Africa's strategy currently is in keeping with those practices. I put them in red because, as Dr. Mguni has indicated, the type of engagements we are having is actually to work towards the October workshop, and thereafter further consultations, so we can have buy-in across sectors, private and public sectors, as well as various stakeholders to support the arts and cultural sector. So, as I indicated, in terms of methodology, we relied mainly on the desktop study, including a detailed policy review, as I've indicated, research reports and academic sources, focusing mainly on international best practices. We did a documentary analysis, a website audit, so and focus group discussions, which were in a way engagement with stakeholders, representatives from various entities, as well as representatives from the DSAC that were involved in implementing these programs and having oversight over it. So let me just explain a little bit about the documentary analysis. In the 2016-2017 study, we actually did the documentary analysis, plus we did surveys with all the beneficiaries. So we went and we did a sample of the beneficiaries, and we noted that much of the information that we needed were actually in the documents that that you have to engage with when you get funding from the DSAC. So things like application forms, progress reports, the contracts that are signed, and often they delineate what exactly you intend to achieve, given the different types of programs. And then in addition to that, you also have, which we relied on quite heavily, is the closeout reports, because the last tranche of funding is not released without the closeout reports. Now, that is not without its problems, colleagues, because one of the important recommendations that was made previously in the review and remains so, and it's not unique to DSAC, it's actually institutionally across all sectors and institutions, where we have a real challenges in terms of knowledge and data management, and that's why there is a move towards systems, putting in proper monitoring and evaluation systems, so data is not with individuals or in boxes, etc. Because when people leave or offices change, etc., you can have serious challenges, which to some extent we have experienced as well. So you have your five main work streams or programs: artists in school, cultural events, flagships, public art, and touring ventures. And you could see that the dominant ones are touring ventures and cultural events, followed by flagships. Flagships, your established major events that are held across the provinces, and then you have a bit of artists in school and public art. We all of the beneficiaries, all of them that received funding, we went and looked at websites to see, are you firstly current, do you exist, still exist? That's a critical question to for sustainability. And of course, colleagues, we are very, very mindful of the fact that you may be current, but you're not on the website, because a lot of deliberately beneficiaries are your emerging artists, etc., who may not have a website. But we did an analysis, and it does tell us a lot, even whether when funding is received, whether DSAC has visibility, because in many cases where websites do exist, and I'm sharing some of the findings now, you have other sponsors that are on the website but not DSAC. In terms of the focus groups, we looked at the different categories. Are they adequate? Do they reflect the status quo? And are they able to capture the different domains or genres or activities that take place within arts and culture, which, as we very well know, being in the sector, is extremely diverse. We also unpacked the public and other types of funding that participants were aware of, the challenges, what categories of the MGA program are having the most impact, and which should be continued and supported, and which should be, there should be a really reduced focus, and why. Current funding approaches: will the events activities supported continue without DSAC funding? This is critical, by the way, for sustainability and the appropriateness and relevance of the key recommendations forwarded. So the report was in a draft stage before we had the focus group as kind of a think tank to look at some of the findings and the recommendation. And so they significantly provided greater insights and helped us refine the recommendations even further. So I just want to very quickly go through the literature review and the funding models for the CCIs in particular. The importance of the CCIs are in the literature, irrespective of whether you're dealing with South Africa or any other country. So there's generally consensus that the CCIs play very, very important roles in society, and that the dominance of public sector funding is also, as I said, a prominent trend, and understood, by the way, quite widely, not only in academic literature but in policy documents, etc., because culture is viewed as a critical public good, which I will come to as well. However, although there are substantial public sector funding, there are issues that have risen, and even the current public sector funding is generally inadequate or limited. It's inconsistent, so you get it one year, you don't get it another year, or for many of the emerging artists, etc., they don't have funding security to be able to make business decisions. There's limited access to funding. because it depends on who you know. Are you aware of the calls, etc.? There's lack of diversity in funding, and you'll see that in the results that there are certain genres and domain that benefit more than others. Unequal distribution, and we've see that as well, and lack of recognition. Similar challenges in relation to private donations and funding, which was not only similar but more acute because the funding is so limited from the private sector. One of the aspects that emerge in the literature is crowding out, which essentially means that the private sector sees, all this public money coming in, and they just get crowded out, and they say, listen, let government take care of that. We'll support something else. Education, environment, climate change, etc. become big spaces where funders want to be seen as being visible and doing something. So all these green banks and all of those things. Anyway, so you have publicly funded culture, and economic relationships are very much defined within that space. There are very high level concerns about cultural participation, and oh, by the way, one of the things that I have to add is that we also have had other studies shared with us recently from the National Arts Council and the National Heritage Council, a presentation, and we've included that as well. And one of the studies by the National Arts Council was about participation, and participation remains limited to certain genres and in certain groups. They did quite a good analysis, although more than a decade old, and looked at how demographic and social economic variables affect participation. I'd advise you to read that important piece of research. Various allocations and approaches and preferences for funding different types of CCI's activities. So you do have, when you're in the funding indaba, you're not confined to one approach. So one of the challenges will be to have a framework that allows for flexibility, which I will come to when I discuss in more detail some of our current recommendations around the funding framework. I've spoken about the crowded out effects, and you have main types of funding, particularly, as I said, being the public funding, which we will speak to. Some of the other key takeaways or findings was there's substantial difference in funding amounts, with flagships or receiving the most in terms of the UNESCO cultural domains, dominance of performance and celebration, and Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and Eastern Cape being demonstrating urban dominance. And this is seen with in the analysis as well. There's high levels of alignment in understanding the importance of the CCIs in relation to the MGE program, awareness, job creation, social cohesion, audience development, limited number of sponsorships, limited information on marketing, limited research and employment, especially stakeholders, service providers, etc. Because one of the spaces you work in, just like tourism more generally, you have direct impacts and then you have indirect impacts. Because if you focus, for example, on a craft maker, then the value chain is where they're getting their beads, where they're getting their inputs, how they're marketing. All of those things come into play, and the impact of the CCIs are much bigger than we often give credit for. So in terms of the policies and procedures review, we've looked at a range of policies and strategies, with the core being the revised white paper, the sector-wide strategic planning guide, the indicator description framework, the revised indicator description for APPs, which is really interesting for me. By the way, colleagues, I'm a M&E person, and I find it very interesting that you have a very, you have plans, good indicators, but we can often not report or track progress against the indicators, which comes back to the way in which we might be managing our information, which is linked to the framework for M&E, which was developed by SACO as well. And then you have a whole range of guidelines and processes that are clearly established, your announcements, your application forms, and a whole range of other forms, clear adjudication processes, should there be appeals, etc., your requirements and letters, and we looked at all these documents as well. So we looked at the work streams. There's a range of gaps, and we've also found that there was no clear definitional category. Sometimes when we don't know, we're just putting it under etc. So we really need to tighten up on that. And often the numbers do not correlate, and I'll speak to that when I'm presenting some of the finding. You have clarity on screening processes. There's a need for clarity on screening processes and recording of decision. Data quality is a concern. You also have non-compliance issues and inconsistencies, and a lot of times either reports do not exist or not filed properly, or the requirements were not, sorry, that is met, not me, incomplete and non-existence, over-reliance again, and lack of knowledge. So let's just very quickly go through some of the key findings. I've taken some of the tables, not all of them, so that you get a sense of at least some of the key findings. We used, as I said, UNESCO's cultural domains, and then you will start to see that there's a very high, the beneficiaries usually comes from performance and celebration, the performing arts, music, festivals, fairs, and feasts. And we actually relate that to the fact that a lot of the funding is for events or activities. And therefore you'd see very few, for examples, in the books and press categories, because you're publishing, etc. Although there are some fairs, etc. Again, it is very much event or activity driven. And what that then does is it actually forces you in a way to support the either established or emerging artists and producers and performers, etc., that are already making the cut, rather than actually having a true some support for those that are really starting their careers. And we do have a recommendation about startup funding a little earlier. This is a very interesting finding for us, because you actually have funding that is being received from less than 50,000, and unsurprisingly up to 10 million, with most of those organization or entities that are receiving funding in the higher levels being in the flagships category. So for the most part, the bulk of the your beneficiaries are receiving amounts that are definitely less than R1 million and less than R500,000. The province, in terms of provincial location, you see the dominance of Gauteng, followed by KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and Limpopo. And by the way, this was also evident in the National Arts and Council study as well. So, and of course, once you focus in those types of provinces, you tend also to be urban biased in which is evident in the next table as well, where the majority of are urban based. However, The good news is that there is a spatial spread, and there's also inroads into peri-urban and rural areas, and you can see your efforts as DSAC bearing fruit, because this is a space that you really consider when you are allocating funding. So what are the objectives for hosting events? Again, it correlates very nicely with the MGE, with the most talk relating to cultural and arts awareness, job creation being also very significant, audience development, education, social cohesion, and training and capacity. These, the top objectives align directly with those of the MGE. Type of partnerships and sponsorships, unsurprisingly, your main sponsorships was government, national government, followed by private other, which means not the banking sector. We categorize the financial sector and then the other sectors, as well as you'll see a prominence of local and provincial as well. Now, this could not necessarily be a true reflection, colleagues, of where partnership and sponsorships comes from. Remember, we're doing a documentary analysis. So we're looking at closeout reports, we're looking at progress report, and we are making an assumption that the organizers have given us all the information. Of course, that's why you do quantitative analysis, because you can generalize and assume that some information is not thorough. However, we did note that there are sometimes a hesitancy to declare the funding that is coming from other sectors, particularly the private sector, because the fear is that if you say I have money, then government is either not going to give you or give you less, and that came out in some of in the focus group discussions as well. I also would like us to note that of concern that we raise in the report, that there are also cases of double dipping. So double dipping, particularly from government, can be a huge problem because it's still from the fiscus, it's still public money. So a lot of the organizations are getting money from multiple sources, national, provincial, and local. Again, because you don't have a database where you can go register and say, I've allocated, and put it on a database. And then after a while, when you look at an organization, you'll be able to know exactly where the funding is coming from. So you have monitoring and evaluation as well as data limited. There's category confusion. It contributes substantially. It clearly and it aligns to the MGE objectives. There are, by the way, we looked at two other aspects: social sustainability or social empowerment, and environmental sustainability consideration. And there is evidence that environmental awareness are linked to a lot of the activities you're funding, but the dominance and of course, understandably so, is around social impact, education, awareness, etc. There's also, we found some interesting job statistics. Again, and by the way, doing a survey won't have made any difference, because when we did the study in 2016, 2017, there was very little information that could be provided by the entities. They couldn't disaggregate, for example, how many people were full-time employed on activity DSAC or a project that DSAC was funding. How many was part-time? How many, and they certainly couldn't give us the demographic profile or anything of that sort. But jobs were being created from the information the limited information available. Jobs are being created mostly on a temporary basis, on a contract basis, adult basis, which, by the way, SACO has done studies that actually show that this is not unique. This is, in many ways, the nature of the beast of the arts and cultural sector. It is interesting, for example, that in terms of people employed on a permanent basis, you have 1 to 77 and 1 to 1,106 employed on a temporary basis, with, of course, quite a substantial proportion not providing any information, as I've shown you in brackets. Unsurprisingly, the larger numbers are for the flagships and more established events. Substantially higher numbers of women and youth were employed compared to persons with living with disability. Although there was very low response rates in terms of that. One other aspect that we noticed in the review of the documents is the high level of volunteerism, and volunteerism plays a very important role for your sector. It's skills development, it's career exposure, it's youth, particularly youth empowerment and empowerment of other groups. So that is something that we should be tracking as well. So there's a number of challenges that were identified in the documents. Lack of funding and financial constraints was obviously a key and persistently remains so. I personally think that we need to really look, and when we did the survey, by the way, we tried to unpack this because we asked for information on income and we asked for information on expenditure. So then that actually is a much more objective way of assessing whether money is enough or not. So firstly, what did you propose to do? Then did you get enough money to do what you intended to do, and how did you spend the money that you had? I can tell you that very few reports gave any information on expenditure. And that's where the problem is. We really don't know whether it's just a desire for more and wanting to make more profits, or it is about operational costs being not sufficiently covered. Concerns about logistics and event management. Be careful here, because once you sponsor an event, whether you DSAC or any other entities, I know NAC, NHA, all the entities support events, etc. Be careful when there are range of challenges, delays, artists not being paid, etc., because your reputation gets tied to the reputation of whichever activity or organization you are funding. Insufficient time, delays, particularly delays, by the way, in releasing the funding. Venue problems, I've spoken about the DSA delays, poor attendance, accessibility, limited spatial coverage, and staffing issues. And we really think that M&E and training and development to support recipients and DSA officials will be important in this regard, because a lot of time information is not being collected properly, and more importantly, a lot of the types of challenges that are being experienced can be improved with proper event management and other skills. So some of the recommendation in terms of policies and procedures is include oversight and systematic implementation of monitoring and evaluation of the policies and procedures. By the way, the National Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, our DPME, has a CIAS tool. It has an a tool that they've developed where you regularly report on and you monitor policies and procedures. So if that training has not been done, colleagues, I think you should do it. It just comes from, I'm also currently on the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial and Planning Commission, and it's a very, very useful tool just on the side. Funding categories could be reorganized by the amount of funding received instead of the type of event to facilitate effective administration, monitoring, and evaluation. Because you can make certain assumption about funding. You can, for example, if those in those 50,000 or less category, they usually individuals you're funding or emerging artists, etc. If you're giving 10 million, you should have very high expectations in terms of reporting, in terms of sponsorship, in terms of your visibility, etc. So funding should really, in some ways, influence what you require in terms of reporting and what expectations you have in terms of sustainability. And we also suggest introduction of funding on a sliding scale from seed funding or startup funding, which is very limited at the moment, although I think NAC does provide some of that funding as one of the entities, and so does other entities as well. And right up to your established events. Part of the sliding scale should be when must you exit, because some of the contracts do have that you can only, and some of the work streams say only funded once a year or 3 year cycles. But we've seen, as I've already indicated, high levels of inconsistencies which could be deemed to be non-compliance. Refinement of the guidelines and formats have more specific criteria. And for example, if you're asking about a population group, specify the categories. If you're asking about things, because just don't put gender, because they could provide information but not in numbers or not in percentages. Be very, very specific, especially when you require quantitative data that's going to allow you to do a trend analysis over time. Differentiate between not-for-profit and for-profit applications. This is important because really you need to be very, very careful when you're using public funding for profit applications where you have a much higher level of accountability to justify the investments in terms of broader societal goals such as job creation, social cohesion, etc. Creation of a database, building capacity among the recipients, which we spoke about, and of course the funding in DABA. Some of the other recommendation is training and capacity development, peer-to-peer learning, improved knowledge. Post support monitoring is very, very important, especially for sustainability, verification and compliance protocols. So you should be, the DSAC must have a system where, yes, we've received your contract, we can release your money. We've done this can happen. There's sometimes steps are missing, and it could cause problems, especially from not only a monitoring and evaluation perspective, but from an audit perspective as well. Development of dashboard reporting, real-time reporting, verification of reports. This is very important because if you rely only on the documents, you need to understand that you are relying on self-reporting. So if I say there were 30,000 people at my event, and then you can pull a trump and you can say, well, there was only 10,000 or whatever. So there can be a lot of questions, especially if these reports and information become public domain, because remember, you operate in a public, not a public space, political. So if you gave somebody X amount and then suddenly you're using it in your documents to say this event had 30,000 people, and a different a political persona may have been there at the event and said there was not more than 5,000. So how do you justify the catering costs or this cost or all the other costs? And of course, DSAC officials must be trained and have access to the information. Now, let me just go quickly in terms of, I did say we shared some of the funding information, but the last part is the funding model, which we're hoping to use as the framework for the funding in Durban. So we have noted that you have funding for the arts and culture, the public domain, and then, of course, private sector and other domains. For the national government departments, your main funders is DSAC, Department of Trade Industry, and Department of Tourism, and particularly there's double dipping there in terms of cultural events and festivals. Provincial departments, especially your Department of Sports, Arts, Culture, and Recreation, again, and tourism, local municipalities, and they particularly want the destination marketing. Unsurprisingly, your national lotteries commission, the National Film and Video Foundation, Business and Arts South Africa, Arts and Cultural Trust, National Arts Council, National Heritage Council, and your National Youth Development Agency as some of the main public funders, and much of that funding comes through the entities that have been set up. So other types of funding that we find evident in South Africa is organizational funding. So you would have tourism organizations or cultural organizations, etc., that provide funding. Private funding, which is which includes venture capital and incredibly low, but has huge potential, especially if you build the right partnerships. Then you have a range of collaborative funding, which is private and public sector, and you have some of your entities, by the way, doing that very well. And the event or the activity itself leverage financial in-kind support from a range of entities in the form of both sponsorships and grants. Is probably going to be critical in terms of sustainability. Crowdfunding, very limited in the South African context, but these are personal or philanthropic donations, usually online, internet, websites, social media, etc. It is massive in some parts of the world where you actually have artists who become huge names in the business, and their entire career is based on investments from crowdfunding. You have self-funding, artists, organizations, etc., using their own resources, personal savings or incomes that are generated. Unfortunately, we've seen this. We did a study on the COVID-19 impacts, and we've seen this actually wipe out personal savings, etc. It is the way many organizations and individuals in this sector survived and rode out COVID-19. And of course, an important contributor also is earned income, ticket sales, exhibitions, selling exhibitions, space, service providers paying products, merchandise, etc. By the way, I should mention that there are other SACO studies that have really raised concerns about intellectual property in this in arts and cultural space, which is really open to vulnerability. So we propose an integrated funding framework that supports existing approaches and a combination of the different types of funding that the public and private funding already discussed. It needs to be diversified and improved. We need to also learn from previous experiences and best international models and practices which we draw from. For example, the NAC study on the scholarship and bursary programs actually shows how you can support the development of skills in the sector. I think it's in the conservation space that they were supporting, which is clearly a rare skill. But how important it is to even understand who is best placed to provide that support. For example, that report concluded that scholarships and bursaries, internships, etc., that are provided for the sector should be best implemented by the CETAs. We need to rethink open call categories. Government funding will remain critically important, and funding opportunities are critical not only for artists, by the way, because as I said, we focus on the event, but we actually need to focus on organizations to develop new works, reach new audiences. So the organizations themselves need to be funded directly to thrive. This, by the way, was a major recommendation in the NAC reviews and reports as well. So in terms of our recommendations for the open calls, which is what you rely on heavily, rightfully so, because then you are at least making sure that procedurally everybody is given an opportunity. However, there are challenges, and we suggest that more attention should be paid for application and selection processes to be transparent, fair, and accessible to all applicants. Provide clear guidelines for applying and ensuring that the selection panel is diverse, not only demographically, by the way, and represent communities, but also the different domains, the different types of genres, so that they can be representation in that panel. Because sometimes if you do not have somebody present, you may not understand why somebody requests that type of money to publish a book or publish a piece of art, or work on a piece of art, or whatever it is they're doing. The open calls should be complemented by other types of calls and strategic funding allocations. And we particularly suggest that there should be more budget allocation for targeted calls. Because from 2011 meeting the transformation and equity targets are very, very important. And although we've seen some shift, there are major challenges. And I think to continue to do things in a manner and assume disabilities or youth will benefit is very problematic. And it is time now that the system has matured and capacity has matured, where there are targeted calls for specific groups to ensure that there's diversity, equity, and inclusion within the sector. Provide opportunities for artists and cultural organizations from marginalized communities to access funding and develop their work. So in this way, to address historical imbalances, and we need to really think about the communication of these open calls, of these targeted calls, so that those that we desire to benefit do so, rural areas, etc. We live in a very, very complicated world and a very diverse space. And so just putting something on a website or a newspaper or whatever is really insufficient to make sure that those who have the talent and should benefit do so. Have fair, clear, and inclusive criteria. As I said, just be very careful about the criteria, because there must be sensitivity to the different genres, because it's not a one size fits all sector. It's probably one of the most diverse sectors. The funding in DABA, we also, in preparation, we make suggestions for the funding in DABA. And by the way, we are doing some of this, undertaking a more in-depth analysis of the lack of financial sustainability. So looking at some of the literature, looking at this dependence on government funding, and particularly why it is that some events and activities that have been funded literally for decades still can't be sustainable. A feasibility study to evaluate the implementation of private sector incentives. So there's a lot of studies. We've even did a review on BASA, some of the other entities. We're looking at the film industry specifically currently. There's a whole range of work being done. But on DSAC and the entities, we might want to actually evaluate the private sector initiatives so that we have a better understanding on both the public and the private sector initiatives. We advocate the use of the ecosystem resiliency funding model because, as I said, we work in a diverse and complex sector. I'll explain the key elements of that model to you in a second. And adopt a more strategic approach rather than you need money, let me give it to you this year. We really need to take strategy requires taking a longer term view and creating the environment for impact rather than just only focusing on a specific activity an event. The funding in DABA is going to take place in October, and it's been supported widely by participants and key stakeholders. So finally, what are the elements of the ecosystem resiliency funding model? By the way, ecosystem and resiliency, ecosystem comes from environmental sciences, and it's not just only because I'm an environmentalist, but it is resiliency, and ecosystem resiliency in particular has now become the kind of a terminology widely used post COVID-19, because nature balances, and when it starts to, when there's an external or an internal change, it adapts it, and that's what you need to be able to do, and that's why ecosystem and resiliency is important. So where should we start off by? The way this model operates, you must understand the needs and opportunities of the sector. I think we have a fair a competent grasp of the sector, especially given the SACCO's mapping studies, etc., where we have regularly been able to provide inputs on the status quo. Establish a clear vision and goals. Here we can also use colleagues, as the DPME suggests, the theory of change. What do we want to see the sector? What do we want change? And then move or have interventions to realize that change. And in many ways, the MGE has that. You've got your objectives formulated, you have your work streams, you have your mandate. Rethink the funding allocation models, define the funding priorities. You cannot try, and if you have limited funding, you can't spread it so much that there's no impact. You may want to say, for this 3 years, we're going to do X. For the next 3 years, we'll shift to a different sector. But those are the kind of tough decisions you need to take to be more strategic, which likely will result in higher levels of impact. Identify funding sources and develop the funding mechanisms, which are aspects that will emerge in the funding in DABA as well. Fostering collaboration and partnerships will be key, and so that in DABA we've got to identify the right entities, the right philanthropic organizations, I know embassies, for example, do a lot of support of these festivals, etc., as well as, of course, your key private sector players. And Dr. Nguni and colleagues who are organizing the event, your entities, NAC, BASA, etc., have very good established relationships, as I know you are aware of. Promote accessibility and inclusion. This is key, by the way. Stir innovation. We are focusing too much on these established events. We're doing the same thing every year, same suite of events, but expecting more jobs, expecting more of this, expecting more of that. It's not going to happen. We've got to create the space to think differently, especially, read the pulse of the new generation. They consume everything, including arts and culture, very, very differently from the norm that we are used to. And of course, I spoke a lot about evaluation and monitoring, particularly a good data management system and the framework itself. October, the funding in DABA. We should have indabas regularly so we can review and adapt. Thank you, colleagues. Quite a mouthful, and thank you so much for allowing me to go through the presentation.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the insightful presentation and, of course, explaining in so much detail. Colleagues, if anyone has a question, kindly raise your hand and we'll acknowledge that. And what we will do is we will take questions. We will take 3 questions and allow Prof to answer that. And then we will move along from there. At this point in time, I see that Pumelo has a hand, so please feel free to go ahead and ask. Pumelo, if you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, Pumelo. You've been unmuted. You can speak. Thank you.
Chairperson, this is Monica from the National Arts Festival. I see Pamelo has noted in the comments that he doesn't have a microphone. So maybe if he can be encouraged to post his question in the chat.
Thanks, Monica. We'll hand over to Mohammed. Then after that, Lerato, please.
Am I audible?
Yes, Mohammed, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Muhammad Plaatjes from Beaufort West. We run the Beaufort West Summer Festival every year. Our learning curve was at the National Arts Festival. I heard Monica is here. Monica, I just wanted to say this, and I have waited a long time to say this. Thank you for the first opportunity to give the kids of the Karoo a platform in COVID-19. Since 2021, we was part of the National Arts Festival. And then my question is to government parties, when they fund and when they approve you, they come down without the explanation. I just wanted to know why they're not giving an explanation down. For instance, you ask maybe 50,000 rand and then they bring you down to 30,000 rand. Can you maybe make me clear on that, please?
Excuse me, Chair. Am I audible?
It's
Pimelo here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohammed, for the question. Lerato and then Siposiso Kaba. We will
Chair,
ask you to go ahead.
can you hear me? This is Pimelo.
Pumelo, we can hear you. I'll
Okay.
just give you a chance after
All
Siposiso.
right.
Thank you. Lerato, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for the presentation, Prof. I just have a few comments and also raise a few things that I would like SACO to actually take further before the funding endeavor that is going to take place in October. I have been in the sector for some time, and I've also had a recognition of the sustainability concerns, more particularly in terms of understanding, or there's a difficulty in terms of how we can analyze the impact of public sector funding within the CCI sector, particularly in that space that public funding is more concerned about macroeconomic indicators, where in terms of return of investment and so forth, whereas the private sector is more concerned in terms of the ROI with monetary and sales and revenue. So for me, there's still a difficulty in that space. And I would also then like to draw to this one agenda in terms of the classifications of jobs. I think we need a more sub-classification in terms of the permanent jobs, because in terms of how MGE funding has been going is that on an annual basis, we fund organizations or projects, but these projects are one-time projects. And it's not like it's consistently happening every month, every year. And without government funding, we see some of these projects not continuing. And we need to get a clearer understanding in terms of when projects or organizations report back in terms of permanent jobs. How do we classify them? Is it a permanent job that is getting an income on a monthly basis, even after the event has taken place, or it's a permanent job for that duration of that project? So such things would be quite interesting to get information on, which I do believe will further unpack or make us get into a better directional view of getting a better financial model. And then I think in terms of the raising of the monitoring and evaluation of these projects, it's quite difficult because I think from the word go, we still have a very huge lack gap in terms of cost evaluations when proposals are submitted to us. Yes, it might be a good idea, but in terms of the budgetary line items, drawings, and all of these things, some of these things are not that viable, feasible in terms of the costings that some of these projects submit to us. And even when the expenditures come back, it's quite a tit for tat. I wouldn't have the correct word right now. But in terms of the expenditure challenges, the operational costs, are some of these costs made sustainably, or they're just being made because, I mean, the sector is a one-time shot, so you probably, someone would quote you an invoice service of 100,000, whereas the service on a market base could be costing about 50, 60,000. Those are some of the challenges where I think also the expenditures are not that quite sustainable. And even when we come to the monitoring and evaluation, it's quite difficult to get that economic benefit or ROI from a public sector point of view. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Lorato. We'll move on to Siposiso, and then we'll hand over to Prof. Bob. After that, we'll acknowledge both Pumelo and Monica as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, and thank you, Prof, for the presentation. My name is Pusiso, and I'm just going to say this so that you understand my questions or my comments in context. I was the Director General of the Department of Arts and Culture in 2011 when MGE was started, and I left the department in 2015. So I worked with Dr. Mguni and Monica and others on this. So do take my comments with a pinch of salt because of that. My comments, well, the first thing maybe, let me request that the document, again, not just the appeal, that you work with the Chief Director on that. We have in the, because
she's going to the same meeting I'm going
Dr.
to now.
Nguni,
With
if you
the
could please
minister.
mute your mic.
Okay, shall I continue?
Please continue, Siphosiso. Apologies about that.
Yeah. Is it possible to share the full document and not just the presentation after the workshop here? The second thing I would like to address is, did the study look at alternative ways of supporting the funds from the private sector? And they would work differently for different subsectors of the arts. For instance, a while ago there was a fund management company that was encouraging its clients to see visual arts as investment assets. So is that are those, have we looked at that and not just sponsorships? I One of the things I've always found quite fascinating is that when MGE was adopted as a policy and a funding program, there was a particular focus of the arts, and it was about economic development, economic growth, and job creation. Now, some of those policy objectives may not have changed explicitly, but there has been a bit of a watering down of that. Yet the funding mechanism has remained as MGE. Have we? It would be interesting to hear Prof's comment on that. The 2 years ago, I think it was, the Department of Digital Technology and Communications drove through cabinet a master plan for the creative, cultural and creative industries. I'm just interested to understand what we see as a relationship with this, because there are a number of other departments that fund creative products and creative services. TTIC definitely, the Department of Small Businesses, and the Department of Digital Communications. But what is likely to be the relationship between what this program is doing and what the Department of Digital Technologies is doing? Finally, and if you are uncomfortable responding to this, I would understand it, so it's okay. But one of the things that is happening quite frequently is that when there is a change in minister, not just in the arts, but in probably most ministries, one of the first things that is alleged is corruption. And in a department that does funding, that is very frequent, and we experienced that not many weeks ago. But in the review that you have done, have you found such? I know that you are looking at impact and you are looking at the effectiveness of the funding, but are there any real things that have jumped up that says there's corruption in the way that these things are done, and how do we address that particular area? Because it does affect the entirety of the basket that goes towards those goods and services in the long run if it is not addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siphosiso. Prof, that's the first 3 questions. So if you'd like to respond, but if there's certain things that you'd like to hand over to Dr. Nguni, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Let me take a stab, Dr. Nguni, or you want to go first? Should I start and you can come in, Dr. Nguni, or you want to go first?
Okay, thanks, Prof. Yeah, colleagues, I'm sorry, yeah, I could not get all the questions because I was called at another meeting this side to respond from our branch meeting because they are running concurrently. So when this was going on, then I was also talking this side. So I'm back here. So I only got the last question. Maybe, yeah, regarding the involvement of stakeholders in our invitation, we made sure that delegates should be attending the conference should cross-cutting, that is from the private sector to the public sector. For instance, we had mentioned, there was a mention of the School of Government to be part of that, the DTIC, other organizations, and also even up to the banks. Some banks have been mentioned here. So there's a number of stakeholders that have been, for instance, mentioned here that need to be invited. But then we noted that our report, to such an extent, like as it started at the beginning, it was kind of limited to, it was confined to MGE. But then with time, as I have indicated, that we started this study, this study in 2022. So we were trying to kind of factor in other sectors that were not part and parcel of this, so that when we go to the conference, and then this report is as comprehensive as it should be, because when we use it as a basis at the conference, it should form the foundation of that discussion. And definitely this report, in my view, it should though it's limited, it should entail all the other funding organizations that are funding the sector. And I have seen the topic there in the presentation of Prof. Maybe we need kind of revise that one, so that it does not get bogged down to MGE. Instead, it's maybe we say evaluation of the sector funding, or other sector funding mechanisms. And then so that it becomes so broad that it entails almost all the other funders that are involved in that. Definitely everybody will be invited in that conference. And I think you must also make sure, because we still have some time, make sure that this report, when it goes to that conference, is as broad, it covers as broad as possible. Thank you. So that's the only question I managed to grasp when I got back into the discussion. Thank you.
Dr. Nguni, we can chat offline on what exactly, because we do recommend that we better understand the private sector funding, but it's beyond the scope of the initial research. But as we can discuss offline with SACCO colleagues and the DSAC colleagues what other types of work need to be done in preparation for the funding in DABA. So colleagues, let me quickly just take a stab at the very insightful comments, and thank you. They do, I think, reflect some concerns as well as opportunities that exist. Let me just start off with Pomelo, who made the comment in the chat about the brilliant projects being rejected, and I assume you are suggesting that the funding model kind of looks at who is contributing to the GDP and who is contributing to tourism levy funding, etc. I think that perhaps that should be a component of a specific type of funding, because the MGE and its broader societal and economic objectives will not align with that thinking, because that type of thinking, you bet on the strong. So if I contribute to the GDP, you give me more money, or you give me more opportunities. And with a developmental and transformational state, it's like, for example, most of us in this meeting would probably pay high taxes, but we don't reap the majority of the benefit of those taxes. It goes actually to those who need it the most. But I think your question is very, very important. Who should be the beneficiaries, and what criteria should we be using to determine who those beneficiaries are, who benefits the most from the funding? SACCO colleagues, please put that as a key even a panel discussion, because I think that is a critical question that you raise. And somehow we need to be on the same page, or at least understand this landscape of beneficiaries, landscape of interest and stakeholders, so that we cover as many as possible, and we create win-win situations as we go along. So Pomelo, thank you so much for that comment. So the colleague from Beaufort West, sorry, I didn't, I think it was Muhammad. Um, why not give an explanation for why reduced funding? I think your point is well taken, and that was the suggestion we made about transparency and communication, etc. Because if we in this developmental learning space, then we must do what we do. I'm, for example, an academic, and when the National Research Foundation rejects my application for funding, they actually tell me what I did wrong. You didn't do this, you don't have a clear objectives, your budget doesn't align, blah, blah, blah. And that actually helps me to do better in the future. But from the research we have conducted, there are generally two reasons why there's reduced funding. One, reduced funding, which I referred to in my presentation, was that we are trying to give as many something. So if you need 50,000, but I only got 500,000 and I want to give 20 rather than only 10, then you all are going to get 25,000 or around that ballpark. And that's one of the issues we must raise about what criteria we use. Is it a sliding scale? What type of budgets? Because sometimes then, as we've suggested, perhaps don't put out calls in categories, this performing arts. Actually put out calls in terms of your budget. We want to support X amount of people. This is the amount we have, so that you are able to customize your budget or look at the call and say, this is either for me or not for me. The second reason why there's reduced budget, and it answers somebody else's question also. This is not DSAC, it's not administrators making decisions, colleagues. There are committees that are set up with various stakeholders, etc., that look through the applications and screen application. There is a real intent to be transparent, to make sure there's fairness in the system. And a lot of times when these committees look at your budget, they reduce it because there's no alignment. You're suddenly traveling, but you don't have anywhere in your application why you're traveling, and or you have a catering, but who are you feeding and why? So it's those kind of things, and maybe it speaks to improving applications, or how you think through what you want to do and how you budget, and therefore maybe you're more likely to get what you need, rather than us looking at it and saying this is like a wish list rather than a budget linked to the activity per se. Lerato, thank you for reiterating and sharing some of your concerns. Of course, much more important insights, because you're on the ground in terms of sustainability concerns. And I think you raised an important question: how can we analyze the impact of public sector funding, especially because our interest is more societal and, as you said, broader. But the private sector, they want to see a business case. They want to either see that me supporting this event will make me more money, either directly, so it's an opportunity for me to go and sell something there, or make money, or provide a service, or it is over time. So it's reputation building, it's branding, it's marketing, and all of those kind of things. And I think that is where we need to really think more clearly about how we can pitch or make a better business case for the private sector. The classification of jobs is an interesting dynamic, but economics quantitative analysis has actually moved way beyond. They have the models, they have the tools, but you need good data to be able to say, I'm giving you 5 million rands to host event X, a festival which runs over 3 days. How do I know how that what that 5 million rand, how many jobs it created? Now there's different ways of doing those calculations. One is you can actually say that out of the 5 million, X amount went directly to salaries. So it paid this person's salary, paid that person's salary, or paid half of this administrators, etc. Or you can be able to do it in a time way, to be able to say, yes, you're permanently employed and you work throughout the year, but what proportion of your time do you spend on this particular activity? Now, those models, as I said, the economists have developed those models for us, but we need firstly to simplify some of the models so we can use it rather than have economists come at a huge cost. But these models, some of them are fairly simple, and more importantly, you need right data. You need to have a number of permanent people employed. What's the expenditure? How much are they getting paid? How often do they work on the project? That type of data keeping is almost non-existent, unfortunately, in the South African context. And that also goes for the cost evaluations. And you are absolutely right. The budget line items are usually, it tells a lot. And I made a comment here, which I put in bold, that I have done this work now, monitoring and evaluation. I started off doing sport events and all the events in Durban, eThekwini municipality decades ago, 25 years ago. And everybody complains, well, not everybody, but most people complain there's not enough funding. I didn't make any money. The service providers, the people selling hot dogs or whatever, they're never making money at the exhibition. Of course they are. Because if you're not making money or you're not getting any benefit from hosting the event or participating in it as an exhibitor or selling something, why do you want to do it every year? Why do you fight to do it every year? So there's something off there. And that's why we are also advocating that the larger, more established events that are getting the millions must have independent audits, proper audits, independently done by professional auditors, auditing companies, because then you'll be able to establish not only economic impact but feasibility, viability, should we wean them off, etc. Sibasiso, I look forward. I hope you're going to be in the Indaba. I'm going to actually make sure that I meet you, because your institutional memory and your experience is phenomenal. You should have been doing the presentation anyway, taking the data and looking at it through your lens. I look forward to you reading the full report. By the way, the full report and the presentations will be shared, colleagues, and having more discussions on this. And you are absolutely right. In fact, in all your comments, the alternative ways of supporting private sector funding, that is actually key. And as I said earlier, we must make a business case and we need to undertake further research, because to the best of my knowledge, nobody has evaluated the private sector funding. Nedbank gives certain amount. Where is it used? How it is used? How many jobs? It's all. We've only done it really for government, because of course we have to report, etc. The watering down of economic growth and job creation. I think you hit the nail on the head, because we keep justifying supporting the arts and culture in relation to the other benefits being significantly more important than economic and growth and job creation. Although, again, we are starting to see robust economic models, etc. SACCO leading the charge, probably even internationally, because DSAC in supporting SACCO is one of the best practices globally. But the quantification, the attribution, because you can't say you created X amount of job as Larato is cautioning us when it's partial. So we need to be able to build a case, because if we generate reliable, valid data, evidence-based information, then we would be able to speak more confidently about economic growth and job creation. And even in some instances, Sibusiso, we may even want to quantify what is the value of social cohesion to South Africa as a public good. We've done it in environmental sciences, where we have quantified, if we save this tree, this is how much it benefits, an actual value. So there might be other models that we can start thinking about, and you have triggered some of the thinking on that. The master plan for the CCIs, we have looked at it. However, you are correct, and we need to make sure that these partners are in the funding indaba, because we have the digital technology space, the other departments, etc. The value chain of the CCIs have become even more massive with technology and innovation and advancements in other sectors as well. So we haven't really looked at those relationships, and we should. Yeah, your question in corruption, I don't ever not respond to controversial things. We have raised this, not corruption per se, because we're not forensic auditors. So there's no way our research can claim to at any level that there's corruption and or any of those practices. What we can say, however, and we say so in the report, that there is evidence of non-compliance that can undermine the reputation of the DSAC, as well as partners and entities. So we're not shying away from that. And we really need to be very, very careful, which is why we advocate for criteria, openness, transparency, a proper, robust knowledge management system that informs a monitoring and evaluation system. And let me stop there. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Prof. And for the colleagues who raised these questions, I hope that you have been answered sufficiently. We're going to take a few more questions, Prof. and Dr. Mguni. So I'm going to start by acknowledging Pumelo, whose hand was up first, and we had some technology issues. So I will hand over to Pumelo, followed by Monica, then by Mandi Lumane, and then I'll also acknowledge Nicola. So if those four people can get ready to then ask their questions, and Prof and Dr. Mguni would be then ready to answer straight after your questions has been posed. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Prof. Once again, apologies for the glitch earlier. I need to put it from the outset that from 2015 and between 2015 and 2019, I served as the Secretary General of the Cultural and Creative Industries Federation of South Africa. So I'm assuming I'm also coming with some institutional memory in raising the issues that I'm raising, given the interaction I had with DSEC. When we look at the initiative called MGE, sometimes I feel like we tend to forget why the department was established. If you recall, there used to be the Department of Kuns and Kultuur. These departments were established because already artists were existing in a country. And when artists are there, it means government deems it fit to establish this department such that to support people who are talented in the country. Now, the reason I want to come through here is because I'm worried that Prof did not um, um, understand what I wrote there. And anyway, those are just pointers. Let's see if we are on the same level or on the same page. When you look at the cultural and creative industries in the United States, in Europe, in other established or first world countries, you realize that some of the funding comes directly from the proceeds of the mechanization of those various sectors and subsectors of the cultural and creative industries in those countries. With the US, for instance, we saw with the evolution of after during the First World War, we saw how film was used to show the military might of the USA with aeroplanes bombing the various countries that the US was in conflict with. And in a way, it gave Hollywood to flourish because, as you see, some of the companies like Paramount, like Universal Pictures, 80, 90 years old. It's because of an initiative of government to invest in the film industry in that manner. And we see the ripple effects today now. We even have the likes of Netflix dominating. And all this, what Hollywood did is there was a ripple effect. People need to wear clothes for those movies. People need to use motor cars. There's catering, the security. Um, there's a ripple effect in that essence. Now, this brings me to the issue of funding. What is it that we are funding? We are funding a sector that still needs to develop to an extent where it can reproduce itself and fund itself. I think that's why we are discussing the funding model today. And my submission today is that um, because there's not sufficient money available or budget, whether it's the NAC, whether the NLC or the NHC, always some projects are rejected because there's no sufficient funding. So we did make submission when we were busy with as SIPSA, when we were busy with the policy formulation on white paper, where we propose that when we look at the funding model, can we look at the distribution of the funds vis-a-vis the contribution of our sector to the GDP of the country? It was just a proposal. Obviously, it was not included in the policy document. And then the second one, we said, at least we are conscious of the fact that when tourists come into our country or any tourist traveling from one city to another town, they purchase what we call cultural and creative industries products, whether it's a book, whether it's a portrait, a painting, people purchase. And how about we liaise, that is our minister liaise with the Minister of Tourism to enter into some discussion that we have a portion of the tourism levy to add into our funding model. Thank you. I hope I'm understood.
Thank you so much, Camilla. Monica?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much for the research, and greetings everybody and colleagues from DSAC. Obviously looking very much forward to reading the report, which I'm sure will have a lot more context and detail. What I did just want to ask, and please forgive me, I joined the session a bit late, so I might have missed some slides. Did the research have an opportunity to really interrogate what kind of funding is needed, the difference between grant funding, SMME financing? Because I think that one of the difficulties that we've had for many, many years in the sector is that everybody's competing for basically the same pot, big and small, corporates, non-profits. So it does make for quite a lot of competition and possibly a lot of unfairness as the large compete with the small and as lots of different interests come to play. So I'd just be interested to know exactly what kind of information we were able to collect about the kind of money that's needed in this research, if that was a focus at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. We'll hand over to Mandi Lulame.
Good day, everyone. Good day, colleagues. I'm Mandi Lulame Manjezi, and I'm part of the African Union, European Union Youth Think Tank. My question essentially comes also with a solution, and it's a question as to how can we reach out to government and have government as the African Union, European Union Youth Think Tank participate in some of the implementation projects that we seek to do that speak to university incubation of the CCI's student exchange and formalizing some of the film, media, and television entities that are currently in the university spaces, formalizing them and having them being part and parcel of the commercialization of some of the festivals, such as National Arts Festival, International Cape Town Jazz Festival, as well as in all of this, trying to build a framework that speaks to bilateralism. More importantly, when you look at film and television and you look at Kenya, our conversations with the Kenyan Film Commission seek for us to have government participating and in being involved in the curation of these efforts. That's my essential one question. And secondly, I want to raise an opportunity in that in September, we have a Mazu Museum that we are seeking to host an AU-EU youth dialogue in inviting more especially the Eastern Cape universities, but also open to the other South African universities, in that we seek to have the conversation around funding and how universities and student artists can participate not only in the funding in DABA, but also in conversations, in the research, and also in the practicalization, been involved in such initiatives. And so the open invite in September for Amazwi Museum seeks to say, come and join us for this conversation as we seek to formalize this. We seek to start to have this conversation in the efforts to formalize our spaces as the universities and the youth, not only for South Africa, but for Southern Africa, in bilateralism with the other regions of the African continent. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Nicola, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, and thank you for a very informative presentation. Just to put myself in context, I work at DSAC and I'm involved in the strategic planning unit. So I hope some of my questions aren't speaking out of the house. I have three questions. The first one is, and I think Lerato touched on it, we really need something, a practical tool that we can use with the MGE projects to measure the jobs created. And it's something that we've been grappling with over the years when Treasury are giving money to the project and they're saying, okay, but if you look back, the purpose of this project is to create jobs, but you don't want to commit in your planning documents upfront how many jobs this money is going to create. And when we discuss about it, it's got to do with how do we classify the jobs? What jobs are we talking about? How are they, which ones are we going to be measuring? And very importantly, if we're providing this funding, how do we know or how can we determine upfront how many jobs are going to be created? And then I'm hoping that the former DG is still part of the meeting, because it would be interesting to know why the funding for the NGE is administered through the department, the national department, and not through the entities that are established to develop the sector. Then, as far back, and Monica will remember, in 2017, I think it was, we did a submission to the Davis Tax Commission looking at the Section 18A tax deductions for donations that people would like to make in the sector. And already at that stage, recognizing that we don't have the resources as government or as the national department to fund everything we would like to, and that there's a huge opportunity with organizations that would like to donate. But if this is not going to be recognized as tax deductible, it really scales all of that back. And did this research have a look at something like that with a tax reform, looking at alternative forms of funding? And then the last one is just with regards to the capacity building around the application process. So I know in government, we're always talking about empowering, targeted groups, women, children, youth, people with disabilities. But how do we practically assist them to make sure that they get applications in that are of a similar standard of the bigger role players? Because until we do that, I think we're going to keep on getting applications from the big players, with people thinking, well, and anyone that works in government that will know a government application is just a nightmare. So is there anything that we can do to try and assist in that area? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I'd like to hand over to Prof and Dr. Mguni, and then just after that, if we could allow Siphesiso just to answer Nicola's question once Prof and Dr. Mguni is done. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. I think I'll start this time around, and then Dr. Mguni and Siphesiso can come in. Pamela, thank you for that clarification of the point you raised. It's a very important clarification, and I'm glad that you were able to unmute to share your thinking, because I really think that's a very, very important suggestion. Although my confusion, I think, does kind of contribute as well, because just be careful if you go by a contribution to GDP and the way in which the RAM models, etc., function, you might end up getting less than you currently get. It's always best to try out models in different scenarios before applying them, and then advocate for that which best serves the interests of the sector. But I never thought, I work in the Department of Tourism space as well, and I've never thought about the that CCI should get part of the tourism levy, and it makes excellent sense to me. We'll include that in the report as part of our recommendation, and I think it is something that can be discussed even further with in funding in Daba. It's also becoming clear to me, Dr. Mguni, which departments should definitely be represented. Department of Tourism, Small Business, DTI, even DPME, etc., should certainly be invited to the funding in Daba, together with the Ministry of Finance, because Nicola, I think you make a very important comment as well. In terms of what kind of funding is needed, and did we look at that? We did look at the types of funding available, but we did not do a full-scale needs analysis. We looked at other studies that were done to, including those by SACO, and particularly that we post, during, and well, as COVID-19 impacts were receding, for both sport and the arts and culture, we did 2 impact studies, and I think we can draw on it to establish what the state of the sector is and the kind of support it is needed. Colleagues, I do not want, I should just say something very quickly about our study. Our study was an MGE review, and then the funding came as a second component, and what we committed to was outlining a funding framework. All the type of suggestions you're making are very, very important, but it was definitely beyond the scope and the budget and the time of the study to be able to do detailed analysis, etc. But I am positive that if we get the right people with the right experience, most of them, all of you included, in the funding indaba, research. We have the information, and we need to start using the evidence to make decisions. Our colleague Mandilame, thank you so much for your comments. I come from the university environment, and I think that it is very, very important that we start to institutionalize and formalize these spaces, because that's where a lot of capacity development and ideas and innovations, not only the universities, the other types of tertiary institutions as well. I am going to contact you, especially because I'm part of a study being undertaken for the African Union to support the trade agreements on the continent, and particularly the negotiations that's going to start. And I think it is really, really important, because thus far our conversation has been inward looking, and African culture, the continent we live in, is probably the most diverse culturally in the world. So there's a lot to speak about these collaboration, etc. And some of that work is being done by SACO as well. Nicola, your comments are particularly important. We do need a practical tool to measure job creation, and I think that Larato's comment about job classification, you reiterated. I must admit, however, that I am a geographer, and what we find very interesting globally is that the sector was known for contract work. You do a bit of this, you do a bit of that, you're constantly changing, you're constantly evolving, etc. And by the way, that's how the whole world of work is evolving. Young people they don't want to have this permanent job for life and all of those kind of things. They sometimes want to move around, work in yachts, and all. They do the strangest things. So maybe and by the way, those tools do exist. They do take some investment. In fact, some of these tools are so they technologically so advanced that you literally have to just put in numbers on a template or on an online platform, and they can generate some of the results for you. But as I said and keep repeating, I suppose because I'm a researcher, garbage in, garbage out. We have to focus on where are the sources of information coming from. Where do we need to come in? Who needs to do the reporting? How should we report? How should we store, maintain, update the data, etc.? We're not going to break that issue, Nicola. We're going to continue to, at best, thumb suck some of the figures, or only be able to report on direct job creation, which relates to direct impact, and we minimize the impact of the CCIs and therefore its broader impact on GDPs, etc., to make business case, to make cases to the Ministry of Finance, etc., why we should be allocated larger funding. Why funding for MG is administered through national department and not through entities? I'm sure Dr. Mguni will take that, and that question was posed, I think, directly as at the former DDG. In my opinion, as the researcher, I think we should just be very, very careful. The entities have to have oversight. The entities have to, they all have different roles and responsibilities. And I think to just allocate funding would be highly problematic. Particularly, all institutions have their own challenges and their own issues, and not one of us are without being able to improve. Donations are very, very important. It is in our report that from crowdfunding to philanthropic to individual and private sector donations, we've included in the report, but we didn't look at the tax part of it. I will have a look at some of the best practices, but it is something that we will actually include in the report, and certainly should be discussed in the funding Ndaba. And improving quality and standards, you have to provide the necessary support, even if it is to train the trainers, have people in local departments that focus on SMMEs and arts and culture, the provincial departments who are trained so that people can physically go there and get assistance to apply. This is not something where you can do online and all of those kind of things. If we really want inclusivity, if we really want the emerging younger artists, persons with disabilities, women, etc., to benefit from this, the hard work simply has to be done so that we can not drop the quality, but ensure that quality is maintained, and that in itself is a skill that we will be handing over to those beneficiaries that are trained in that regard. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about the education and capacity development, but let me leave it there for now. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you so much, Prof. Colleagues, again, I hope that your questions was answered sufficiently. Nicola, I note your question to the former DDG. Unfortunately, he has left the meeting, but hopefully you'll be able to discuss that with Dr. Mguni internally, but Prof obviously took a swing at it and gave you some information on her thinking in terms of that. I'm going to ask Dr. Mguni if he has anything to add to any of these questions. Dr. Mguni, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. You know, I think this discussion is raising a lot of issues. I think that's the most important thing. I think that is also the reason for us to have this kind of a discussion. Because remember, we said that this report forms the basis of what we should be discussing at the funding Ndaba. And the purpose of this meeting, as I indicated at the beginning, that it will help us to, for instance, if we have the input, and then we bring those comments forward, and then so that they are factored into this report. I think it is, in a nutshell, I can say that this information that colleagues are putting forward here is very important, and then I think it needs to be the one that would fit into this report need to be captured in this report, so that these discussions they take place when they take place at the bigger forum, which is the Indaba. The funding Indaba, and then these issues that have been raised here, and then deliberated broadly, so that they are addressed. So I think it is very important that we come up with this. For instance, the issue of there's this issue of tax that has just been mentioned here. Let me just mention here up front that there is another study that we have commissioned that deals with the precarious work and the social security of the, within the cultural and creative industries. And that study is on, and there are presentations that are being conducted all over the country. They started, in fact, it started last year. There were presentations, and we've been inviting colleagues to come and make contributions into that. And then they are still continuing. I know that this quarter, there is another I think a workshop that's going to take place, and then that report is going to be presented. I think some issues that have been mentioned here, like for instance the issue of tax, and then particularly that it can fit squarely there in that kind of a discussion in that report that deals with precarious work and social security. Yeah, colleagues. I think this is the input that I can make. And another thing is that I think Pamela, as you mentioned earlier on, if, for instance, we look at some of the reports that we have developed, particularly the mapping study reports, you can see that, for instance, the issue of funding is to such an extent is aligned to the contribution of the sector to the GDP. Because, for instance, if you look at why you get funding, it's because sometimes you say, how many jobs are you creating, or how much do you contribute to the GDP? So to such an extent, you find that there is a link if you read all those in those reports. But I also think that such information would also be relevant when we deal with those issues at that level. Thank you, Renee. And colleagues, I'm sorry, I have to mention this because I'm just getting into the car. I'm getting to the airport, and I'm catching a flight at 2:00, and it's getting late. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguni. Just before you go, there is another question on the chat. I think this one is particularly related to you. Is information about the funding in Indaba publicly available? Who is invited as well? And I'm asking because I've noticed that current initiatives by DSIC, directly or indirectly, about policy engagements and sector-specific ways forward by the 7th administration are not in public domain. Dr. Mguni, if you could just tend to that before you head out, please.
Yeah, currently we are compiling a list, and then the list will go out. But then after we've compiled that list, we'll submit to our events management, and the list will go out. Definitely, like as I have indicated, we invite almost all stakeholders that will contribute towards this program. And we did indicate that we need to invite people across the sectors. We did mention, for instance, the DTIC. We did mention the Department of Labor, Tourism. There are a number of departments that we have listed, but also the organizations and individuals. Individuals vary from academics, professionals, the industry, managers, and etc. But then obviously that will be also determined by the should I say what, the capacity of the venue, because definitely you have to have a cutoff point to say how many people you invite. But definitely we would like to see almost everybody who will make who's desperate and determined to make contribution to this, to participate at that conference. And then I think the invites will go out as maybe late next week. We'll start it going out. And I definitely would like to see colleagues participating at that conference, which will take place on the 8th up to the 10th at probably at Birchwood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nguni. Colleagues, thank you so much for coming through and taking part in this conversation. I see that there's no longer any hands, so I assume that no one would like to ask or pose any questions or comments. And because of that, I would like to then thank everybody for being here today and for definitely making sure that your voice is heard as well. I thank you so much. Loretta, I'm going to just allow you, given that your hand has just come up, I'm going to allow you as the last participant to actually pose a question to Prof. Bob, given that Dr. Nguni has now had to leave. So please go ahead before we close.
Thank you very much. I just would have liked to alert SACO. There is one organization that the department had been funding on a flagship basis, which is the Cape Town Cape Town Jazz Festival, which has now gone independent this year. I went and attended the festival, and they've gone independent. If we could get SACO to engage with them to see how did they then shift from government funding to now being able to independently through private sector funding and other fundings to host such a successful event with great international artists. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Lorato. Colleagues, thank you so much once again for making time to come through to our workshop. As the South African Cultural Observatory, we truly appreciate your time and everyone, again, who was in this meeting. Thank you so much. We wish you a good day and a great weekend since it's Thursday today. Thank you. Keep well. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.